A Sienna that won't pass inspections. It's got a trouble code on. It runs perfectly fine, but he's in New Jersey. They do inspections. We'll give you a little history of it and see if we can figure out what's going on. Now, normally a Toyota Sienna will run forever, won't have any problems, but unfortunately, he bought this used and somebody had messed around under the dash. So they went in under the dash and, as you can see from this bill, they replaced the PCM harness and connectors with a used harness. Why a used harness? Well, numero uno, the wiring harnesses never go bad on these things unless some fool messes around with them or they get flooded and get corroded, and this wasn't flooded. It makes sense. Why not get a used one? A new one would cost a small fortune. But he's still getting his check engine light on and he can't get his car inspected. He's got this plugged in. You never want to drive with something plugged in all the time. Those are called diagnostic ports for a reason. They're a port for diagnosing what's wrong with your car. They're not made for driving your car plugged in. Some manufacturers, when you plug them in, or even say, car is now in diagnostic mode, do not drive normally. We're unplugging, we're gonna leave it unplugged, and we're gonna plug ours in just to diagnose it. So we'll get this X tool, and we'll plug it in. Now, since they messed around the gateway, and it's got a failure in the gateway. Let's analyze that first. Airbag unit communication system. It's got a problem with the airbag system. Since the wiring harness inside here has been replaced, the airbags here, I'd assume something's probably messed up with that. Now, this is a Jersey car. It lives in New Jersey. I don't know what the law is in New Jersey, but in Texas, airbag does not make you fail your test. We will go back to the beginning, and we'll go up to the engine and ECT that has 7 failures. Control circuit of oxygen sensor. Control circuit of transmission range sensor. Oxygen sensor is stuck. Signal of oxygen sensor is lean. Now we'll look at his $1,230 bill, and we can see here they've replaced the neutral safety switch, which they called the mutual safety switch instead of neutral. I guess they don't know how to spell in Jersey. They really messed up the job they did with the wiring harness and reprogramming the computer, but they did reprogram the computer now. They did not replace the computer. Inside here, the actuators are going on and off and on and off for the HVAC system, the heating and the air conditioning system. It keeps recycling itself here. Definitely a sign that the wiring and or the computer is messed up. I got everything erased. Look, everything says normal. And we're going to go here and we're going to look at live data. Now, as you can see, the car is running perfectly fine. Long-term fuel trim is 0%. Means it doesn't have to add or subtract anything. And in a very short period of time, the check engine light's back on, as is the track off. Now, after resetting it, the first thing that popped was the heater circuit for the oxygen sensor on cylinder number 2. Number 1's over here, so that's a number 1, and this is bank 2. Bank 2, number 1, but they've replaced this a bunch of times. The code keeps coming back. Now, let's say this didn't have a wiring harness in the beginning with a problem that somebody had patched stuff in. The first thing I'd do would be change the oxygen sensor because it tripped. When I erased all the codes, it was the first thing that came up in 30 seconds. Realize one thing. Well, actually 2. He's already changed this twice and didn't help it, so obviously it's not the problem. There's 4 wires in here. There's a feed wire with power, there's wire to heat up the oxygen sensor, there's ground wire, and then there's a data transfer wire. Well, obviously the heater wire's not working because it's got data that the heater's not heating up. The computer supplies that. Obviously, it's not supplying it. It was AAMCO transmissions that did the work. Yes, I know, shouldn't take electric work to a transmission shop, but the guy was told they're electronic experts at this store. Well, obviously, somebody's wires got crossed on that one. They're not experts. They should have really tested it, and they should have seen, hey, after we reprogrammed the computer and changed the wiring harness, and they got that code for the oxygen sensors, all they would have to do is hook up a meter and see there's no power going to the oxygen sensor heater. If they traced the wire and they'd see, well, we put the new wires on, they could check it to make sure they still got power, then they know the computer's not supplying power, that we shouldn't have reprogrammed the old one, we should have replaced it. If you want to go brand new, it's $963 for a new computer for this, and then you got to pay somebody to reprogram. But the owner has found a place online where he can buy the computer and have it reprogrammed for the car for $300. He's going to take his out when it comes and unplug it and plug it in himself. It's not that big of a deal. But of course, the guys at AAMCO should have done that in the first place. They should have checked it all out. They're obviously not experts. They had it for $1,214. So the owner contacted AAMCO, said, what's going on? And AAMCO refused to give them their money back. Well, he replaced the wiring harness and they reprogrammed the computer, and they're not going to give them the money back. even though it didn't fix the car. Of course, it makes absolutely no sense. It's an automatic transmission rebuilding company mainly. The point is they really shouldn't have worked on this car in the first place, and then the owner of the store isn't standing behind it, and AAMCO is not standing behind them. It's like you got two walls you got to get over with these people. Now, that's something to be learned, because years ago in Houston, I had a customer have the same problem. The place had changed the oil. They left the oil filter off on another Toyota, right? The Toyotas don't generally brake by themselves. Of course, they got down the street and the engine blew up. They towed it back and they said, okay, you got to fix our engine. You didn't put the oil filter back on. The guy at the shop wasn't going to do anything, just like the guy at this shop wasn't going to do anything. So they contacted corporate. They didn't say, well, we're not going to give you your money back. They said, those are privately owned franchises. You'll have to sue them. And of course, in that case, it was worse than this. He's out $1,200. He did get the wiring harness replaced with a used one. Didn't fix the problem, and maybe it was part of the problem, but it had shorted out the computer. They didn't finish the job is what it came out to. That was an engine. My customer in Houston, they actually sued the business, and they had to pay for another engine. They had to fork out like $3,500. It wasn't even a new engine. That was a remanufactured engine. But in this case, he'll have to shell out $300. Now, that's not bad. Only thing I'm hoping, they put the wiring harness in correctly and did a good job, because of course if they buggered that up and he puts a new computer in and it shorts that computer out, then you're back to square one. Wiring harness just snaps in, comes out, snaps on. But since it plugs in, I'm assuming they put it in, they just didn't finish the job. But what I don't understand is these guys are supposedly electric experts at this AAMCO shop. You turn on a key, you see if it's sending the voltage, and if they saw no it isn't, they'd realize, okay, the computer's no good, we shouldn't reprogram it, we got to replace it. They should have just followed up, but instead they told him to take it to a Toyota dealer because they don't know what's wrong. But they did not offer to refund his money. If I'd ever done something like that, I learned from my father decades ago, if the customer's not happy for whatever reason, just give them their money back. I gave 4 people their money back in Houston, Texas in 52 years. I wasn't in the wrong, but they just weren't happy, and I said, here's your $500 back, but don't ever call me again. And hilariously enough, that person 6 years later called me up to have me fix their car. But I've got a brain in my head, and I remembered, and I said, you're the one that said I didn't know what I was doing. I gave you the $500 back. Now you want me to work on your car again? Goodbye. Here's a lesson to be learned. Stay away from chain repair stores, especially if it's a transmission chain repair and they say they know how to work on electronics. And we'll find out what happens to his car when he gets a computer and throws it in. In the case of this Nissan, oh, they don't know where this noise is coming from. Well, you can certainly hear it. Now, it'll go away as soon as it warms up. But these guys, they worked on it before. Replaced the alternator. Replaced the belt. Okay, it's still making the noise. But check this out. The fan belt's loose as can be. So I asked her, did the noise go away after they did the work? She said it did for a short time, but now it's back. Well, that's the mark of stupid, ignorant mechanics that don't know what they're doing. Nissan's an older car. It has 2 belts, and they both have to be adjusted. In the case of most modern cars, this is an '07 Matrix. It has an automatic tensioner. Almost all cars do today. You can see it's only got 1 fan belt. You can see the bolt sticking out down right there. There's an automatic tensioner. It automatically keeps the correct tensions. It's not too loose so it squeals, but it's not too tight that it'll burn the bearings out. They're good systems when they're made correct, but the old cars, you had to manually adjust the fan belts. It's simple to do, but when you install a new fan belt, there's something that a lot of younger mechanics don't know, no one ever taught them, is this. You get a brand new belt, it's gotta wear in and stretch a little. You put a brand new belt on, you gotta run it 15 to 30 minutes. It'll stretch a little, then you gotta make it a little bit tighter. They didn't do that, it stretched it out, it's making a noise. And these idiots are telling them, I don't know what's wrong with it. We changed that. Oh, it must be a pulley or something. Well, here's how easy it is to tighten. In this case, you just get a 14mm socket, and this is the tensioner right here. So the front, you just loosen the end bolt, you loosen that, that makes the pulley spin free, and then down here, you'll see there is a notch. There's the bolt, you just have to tighten it up, and that pulls it tighter. In that case, the bolt you have to tighten is an 8mm. You're gonna tighten it, so we gotta turn it the other way, we're not loosening it. We're tightening it. But in this case, there's not much working room, so I got a little stubby one. That way I can tighten it without having to move a little, I can move it a bunch. And as you can see down here, I got to tighten it a whole bunch of times. That means it's extremely loose, and that's why the belt is squealing. Now, this is so many turns until that belt gets tight. You want to get it so you can just barely twist at 45 degrees. As you can see now, when I twist it here, I can just barely twist it 45 degrees. You got a long run of the belt right here, and you just twist. And when you see that belt right here, twist just barely 45 degrees, it's tight enough. Then, of course, you put the 14mm socket back on, and you tighten the front of the pulley so it stays in place. Now, start it up and see what happens. The noise has gone away. Now, granted, this is an old Nissan Sentra. It's 14 years old and 208,000 miles on it. Pretty much reaching the end of its lifespan. As you can see, it's got various oil leaks. There's a lot of leakage by the power steering pump. You can see all the goo down there. But replacing an alternator unnecessarily for noise that came back because they didn't tighten the fan belt correctly in the first place, didn't re-torque it. Look, I've been working on cars for 53 years. Since most cars now have automatic tensioners, young guys don't even know about this stuff. They don't know that if you have a car like this that's older, when you put a new fan belt on, you put that fan belt on and you tighten it up so it's got that 45-degree flex. Then you run it for 15 minutes to half an hour. Heck, take it to lunch, do something with it. Then you retighten it to make sure, because if you don't, you'll end up getting the noise back and people say, well, we changed this and this, it can't be that. Well, guess what? The brand new belt stretches. If you have a modern car with an automatic tensioner like this, you don't have to think about it. It automatically tensions. The only thing you worry about is it wearing out, like this Toyota one did when it had 250,000 miles on it. And yes, be forewarned, the Toyota dealer on this one charged over $1,200 to replace it on the V6 Toyota, so they can be expensive to replace. Maybe go back to the old day where you got to adjust it, but then you got to have old-time mechanics like me that know how to adjust them correctly and don't make them too tight and they ruin things, or too loose, like in this case, when then they make noise again and the guy says, I don't know, I changed those parts, why is it making a sound? We'll take it for a spin, see how the rest of the vehicle is. Notice the noise is gone, even though it's cold now. The idle's quite smooth. Sure, the dash is kind of falling apart to plastic, but still got a reasonable amount of zip left in it. Handle's pretty good. I mean, they never rode that great in the first place, but handling good enough. We'll take a corner a little bit faster. The wheels aren't falling off, and I got total control driving it. Yeah, still kind of a fun little car to zip around in. We'll check the brakes out. Smooth stopping. And yeah, you can hear the power steering pump. Yeah, it's a little bit worn and it's a little bit leaky, but hey, fluid's cheap. That's where the oil's coming from that was around the power steering pump. And you can still have fun driving around. Nissan always made kind of zippy cars. Really, you step on the gas, it goes down the road even though it's an automatic. Really, it still makes for a relatively economical run-around car for getting from here to there. Yeah. You gotta add engine oils, it burns it out, and power steering fluid as some of it leaks out, but hey, it's still a pretty dependable car as far as I can tell. We learned that some, in quote, mechanics don't even know how to properly tighten a fan belt these days. And two, these old Nissan Sentras can be decent knockaround cars. Yeah, you gotta add power steering fluid because that leaks. Cost a lot of money to put a pump on, 200,000 miles, but it still runs pretty good. Probably was sold a bill of goods for an alternator that didn't need. And then who knows what else they would have attempted to sell her on top of that when all it was a loose fan belt. It's very easy to fix. Well, as you know, I'm not a fan of these yearly emissions tests. Years ago, the Canadians did a study. Over $1 billion was wasted on unnecessary repairs. Well, these people are in Connecticut. They're trying to get their car inspected. They spent $2,500 already, and it still won't pass the test. So let's see what's going on here. As you can see, it's a Ford Fusion Titanium EcoBoost. We'll start it up. It runs perfectly fine, but there it is, the evil check engine light, so it will not pass the emissions test. And as I said, they've already spent over $2,500. The people say, well, you got to road test it, bring it back on 100 miles, 5-10 minutes, and the light came back on. So let's check it out and see what's going on. So let's plug it in and move the seat back to short. Intelligent diagnosis. It's like I'm gambling at the slot machine, right? Well, it gambled, got the right year Fusion and everything. You turn the key on, and it's going to start checking things. And look at all the things it can check. Here we go. Smart scan. Now, it won't pass inspection. Hey, this car's got mileage on it. It's got 200-something thousand miles. Don't really care about the ABS. What we're going to start out with is, these are all the OBD codes here. We're going to start with the PCM. It's running 2 lean on bank 1. Under boost with the turbocharger. Misfire in cylinder number 3. Misfire on startup. And bank 1 air-fuel ratio imbalance. What I call it continuous memory problems. They're problems that are very serious. Happens all the time. Well, we'll start out with, it's 2 lean on bank 1. Well, bank 1 also includes cylinder number 3. So there's a problem in the car on bank 1. So let's look at the data for bank 1. You can see this engine is 1 because bank 1, you can see it's 2 degrees 1. This stays much lower. So the bank 1 camshaft is actually worn. And I can feel a slight roll going on here, uneven at idle. Now, you can see bank 1, the exhaust gas oxygen sensor. The data's way off. This is sensor 1, right near the engine. See, everything else so far is blue, meaning that data's good. The injectors, you can see them all. They don't have any errors. Nothing wrong with the injectors. But you can see again, on bank 1, the camshaft, it moves around. The bank 1 cam is obviously warm with 200-something thousand miles. It might not be bad enough to put the check engine light on. But the long-term fuel trim on bank 1 is 2969. That is bad. Definitely a problem with the fuel trim. Even though it's blue at 29%, that's enough to trip codes. It's misfiring. Got 118 in the last cycle. And you can see the spark advance is also jumping all over the place. 7, 10, 6, 14. Shows that the timing chain is obviously worn, which is no surprise with this kind of mileage. So $2,500 worth of work was done at 2 Ford dealers and 1 independent dealers, and none of them get this thing to pass. So let's go under the hood, Kevin. This is a 4-cylinder EcoBoost engine. It's got a turbocharger. It only has 4 cylinders. And all this stuff is plastic. The engine's running lean. Since it's 4-cylinder, only has one thing. And the data coming off the number 1 oxygen sensor is really bad. And I can definitely feel a misfire. And it keeps talking about number 3, so let's check number 3. So we'll take the intake off so we can access the spark plug. And we'll check the spark plug. And what do we find? Well, if you look at this, basically we find that morons have been working on the car. These are the original spark plugs. They have never been changed, ever. Now, she's been charged for numerous spark plugs. Let's just pull out another, see if they're all exactly the same. Off we go. And lo and behold, this one's never been changed either. It's all worn out. Now, not as badly as this, but still, she's paid to have them changed. The people just didn't do their work. So now you can see the difference. See how this is all worn out? You can see, here's the normal gap. This is all way too much. These have never been changed. These are already coated. You don't put any coating on them. If you do, they won't be torqued right. Put all 4 of them in. So we're putting it all back together again with the new spark plugs, tightening all the bolts up. Now make sure you get all the screws on tight, especially on the duct work. You don't want any air leaks. Now we'll start it up and see what happens. And miracle of miracles, gee, the engine isn't rattling around and shaking like it was. So let's shut the hood and reset the codes. So for speed, I'm going to use this to reset it. Erase. You can see the check engine lights disappeared. And we'll take it for a little spin. Well, I can tell right off it's running better. It's not misfiring. Now, yes, the engine is worn. We can tell by the camshaft data. And it shifts a little bit rough. But what they want is it to pass the emissions, not turn the check engine light on. We hope that this does it, because if not, the engine is relatively worn and it may just not be able to make it without being rebuilt. But it does run a lot better. It's not doing the shaking it did before. I'll drive it around a good 15-20 minutes and see what happens. Now the check engine light never came on. You can see it's not on at all. I'm going to look at the data though, just to see what's happening. Now the short-term fuel's gone down to 7, but the long-term's 29. That stays. So we're going to disconnect the battery and reset stuff for that later. And the sensor that was way off before is now only off a tiny bit, so that's a good thing too. So we're going to disconnect the battery cable to get rid of any kind of permanent code, and let's stay off for about 5 minutes. We're going to try every trick on the book because, man, with 200-something thousand miles, that's generally the lifespan of these cars. With the GDI pressured injectors, turbochargers, all that stuff, it just wears these engines out. And we know by the cam data the engine is worn. We're just trying to get it to run efficiently enough so they can get the car inspected and drive it legally down the road, which may or may not be a possibility. Only time's going to tell on that, but at least when they had it fixed last time, the Ford dealer. They said drive it around for a while. In 5 minutes, the check engine light come on. Well, it doesn't come on yet, so that's a good sign. But I'm still worried that this is so far worn that it's not going to pass. Plus, with this GDI system that equilibrates itself as you drive, it could take a week or two of driving for this thing to set it back so that it will pass. And even then, it might run too lean. That's a problem that a lot of these GDI systems get as they age. They have a tendency of running too lean. They're made to run lean for good gas mileage, but then when they get older, they run so lean, they trip the lean code because a lean engine runs a little hotter, so it pollutes more. And even though it's actually running good, it won't pass the stupid test that the government has decided we have to have in all our cars. So we waited, we'll put the terminal back on, and time will tell us if it's going to pass the inspection. It runs a heck of a lot better. You can see it's not shaking as much, but only time's going to tell with the inspection, because at this mileage, 200-something thousand, this is pretty much on the edge of bye-bye time for this particular engine design. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.